acknowledge and honor the courageous conversation norms. And those four agreements are to stay engaged, speaking your truth, experiencing discomfort, and expecting and accepting non-closure. So really making sure that we're using I statements, making sure that we are speaking our own truth, and also just having that space, right? If there's something that we do not want to contribute, that's also okay, and just being able to name that. And focusing on the six conditions, right, of just focusing on your personal, local, and immediately. Again, those were those I statements. I see, I think, I believe, I feel will come into play. Isolating race, as we discussed that, normalizing social construction and multiple perspectives. We're all coming from a different entry point, so just being aware of that. Also, just monitoring agreements, conditions, and establishing parameters, using our working definition for race, and examine the presence and role of whiteness. So, using these four agreements and these six conditions in order to really engage in conversations and deepen our dialogue. So, we've had our keynote, right? And we're here in the Radical Rest, Deepening Mindfulness as Equity Practice. And so just to give you an overview, we've already did our welcome and our wellness check-in. So we're going to go through three main sections of a pause, a breathe, and a reflect. So the pause is really going to take some time, right? We're going to get grounded in mindfulness, equity, and rest, and how that is connected. Then we'll move into our breathe session, where we'll explore some mindfulness practices. And then our reflect session at the end, we'll engage in some mindful journaling and some closing commitments. So hopefully some of the things that we visit today will be something that we can put into our toolbox for wellness. And so just to give you a little bit more about myself, I am Deepening Crowe. I'm a mindfulness educator at Turner Elementary School in Ward 8. I've been teaching for 8 years. This is my second year in DCPS. I'm also a wellness consultant that provides holistic wellness education for businesses and organizations that teach and serve Black children. I'm also the proud mother of two twin girls, Anaya and Brooklyn. They're 10, going on 11, and they're entering 6th grade. And I really believe that we have to educate the whole child. Social and emotional learning is extremely, extremely important to me. Right, our mind and body and soul are connected, so we have to take care of our whole self. That's necessary. But how often do we make it a priority, right? And just to share some vulnerability here, I remember juggling work, school, being a new mom, and all while trying to do that, navigating the way I identify and the way I show up in the world as a Black woman. And my transition from corporate America to education made me really rethink the purpose and the way we educate our children, especially our Black and brown scholars. I experienced my own personal burnout around my third or fourth year of teaching, and that's really when I began my holistic healing journey, really by focusing on all 8 dimensions of wellness, and that led me to a mindful moments lifestyle, as I like to call it. And so that's my intention today, is to share with you some practices around that. So when we talk about being radical, I have some definitions here. We're going to kind of dive into them, right? And radical can be defined as going to the root of origin, fundamental, right? A radical difference. And it can also be defined as an extreme, right, or regards from change from accepted of the traditional forms, a radical change in the policy of a company is an example. So when we talk about radical rest, doing that in a way that it doesn't look like it usually does, doing that in a way that isn't maybe necessarily mainstream, but knowing that that's getting back to our foundation, that's getting back to who we are, and that's really important for us to do that. And when we speak about mindfulness, it's mindfulness, we can be aware of the present moment. And when we talk about mindfulness, I highlight 4 ways that we can be mindful. So one way is this mindfulness of our breath, our body, mindfulness of our thoughts, and our emotions. So I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I would love for you guys to just kind of already name, it's going to be on a Padlet, and then just kind of share some ways that you already engage in rest or self-care and wellness. How do you take care of you? So I'll give you a moment. You guys can click the link in the chat, and it'll lead you to the Jamboard, and you can begin posting things there. And while you guys are doing that, I'll just explain a little bit more about mindfulness. Is the chat working for folks, or? And if there are any issues with accessing the link, we can also just utilize the chat that we have in Teams. And then so when we think about mindfulness, it's allowing us to take that pause and be aware. And Dr. Joy mentioned this earlier. Grounding is one of my favorite mindfulness activities as well, where I'm really just exploring our environment through our five senses. So paying attention, so listening to the things that we may hear, listening to what we're speaking, listening and being mindful of the things that we are watching, whether it's social media or whether it's the news. And really doing things on purpose. So whatever it is that we're doing it with intentionality so that we can really increase that level of awareness. And then also giving ourselves grace. So whatever it is that we are experiencing or whatever it is that we are being mindful of, doing it in a non-judgmental way. And some of the strategies, I see some folks saying pausing to take a deep breath. Yep, that's absolutely. Our breath is really important, especially helping with our brain body connection. I love somebody said blowing bubbles with dealing with anger. Spending time chatting with my teenagers. Walking away from the computer, going outside. Yeah, spending time in nature is really key, really important. And then spaces also open if anybody wanted to come off mute and share out a way that you practice mindfulness or radical rest. Yes, listening to good music that I love. I have a playlist for everything. Music is my life. And I also see reading and spending time with the kids, looking at nature, some more folks listening to music. All of those are really good ways to practice mindfulness and be radical with our rest. And again, right, being mindful really allows us to take that pause and examine our own awareness and realize not to take anything personal. And in that way, we're better able to respond to situations and experiences instead of reacting to them. And one of the things that comes up a lot, especially in education and a lot of the work we do, are biases. And there are many different types of biases. But it's also important to examine where our bias is coming from so that we can be aware of it when it comes to changing the things that we need to change and how we educate students and how we take care of ourselves. And some of the strategies and disciplines that show up in education, I remember one time in terms of Teach Like a Champion, one of the schools I was at, Teach Like a Champion was the main thing that we were evaluated on. It was the main thing that was looked for in the classrooms. And I just remember one of them being track the speaker. And if you didn't have that 100% of eyes on the teacher at a certain moment, then that could be a whole big issue. And then we really have to begin to examine and question, why is that so important to our culture? And I've also been at certain schools, depending on what the culture of that school was, for a child to look an adult in their eye, that's something they didn't do normally at home. So culturally, it was not relevant for them, and they could not understand why that was so important, and in some instances, why they would get in trouble or penalized for that. So it's important to identify and become more aware of our biases, because that really impacts our thoughts and our feelings. And if we are aware of the cognitive behavior triangle, right, all of those things are connected. So the things that we think, the things that we feel, and our behaviors, they all impact each other, and it's all based on our core beliefs. And sometimes that's totally different than what others may be experienced with. So we also have to be mindful of those things. And so on the Padlet, if you click the arrows to go to the third slide, I invite you to just kind of put out some of those biases that we may see, that we may know we already have, or even some that we may see showing up in our classrooms or even in our conversations with families and leadership and or colleagues. And I'll give you some space to do that. And then I'll highlight one bias that some of us may have or maybe not, but the idea that girls are smarter than boys, so that we're going to have more behavior issues when it comes to the way we educate boys in the classroom. And just really understanding and thinking about what part of that is actually true versus what part of that is actually based on just my opinion and some of my experiences. Because our experiences influence our biases, but the more we are around others and the more that we are able to have conversations with them, we are able to understand some of their experiences, and that helps us shift our biases as well. I see some of the other ones coming in. People who have time to relax aren't working hard enough. Yes, that one right there. I remember those folks being, and I used to be one of them. Some of you guys maybe can relate, right? Being the first one to enter the building and the last one to leave the building, and feeling like those were the teachers. Like if you're not a teacher if that's not you, but learning really how to interrogate that. Also, boy students can or should cry less than girl students. Yes. Because we're teaching our boys and teaching our young kings, right, that they can't have emotions. So when they're expressing their emotions, one, they can't even identify it, right? Then they don't even have the appropriate, healthy way to express that. Another one I see is believing that students and families from certain areas of the city are poor or more affluent. Yes, that wealth gap is real, right? And then when we talk about this equity work, noting that that is a bias, and then what are some ways, right, that we can disrupt that after we examine, right? How does that show up in the way we educate our students, and then even the way that we communicate with some of our families? If we think about sometimes which families we may reach out to and the way we may reach out to them and what information we're sharing with them when we are having that conversation. And I see something also about linguistic bias. So, right, English only versus bio multilingual, and examining that bias. And so I want to continue to pause and take some time to reflect on our experiences that really inform our thoughts. So if you are not already aware, these are some of the questions from the ACEs survey. So ACEs is adverse childhood experiences, and they can be an indicator of the level of trauma that a child may have received. So it doesn't mean that if you experience some of these things, that they will definitely have a negative or lasting effect on your overall health and wellness and well-being later on in life, but it's a possibility that it can. So I want you to just take a moment. I invite you to take a moment, kind of just read each one to yourself and just take a personal tally of those that may be true for you, right? So it's just beginning to do a little bit of that integration of our current mindsets and our current identities. And there's no need to share, but just kind of go ahead and take a moment, 1 through 8, just kind of note how many tallies may be true for you. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list. There's just 8 questions. The survey is much longer. And while you guys are taking that tally, I'll just read a few of them. So 1, thinking about in your childhood, if you live with a parent or guardian who became divorced or separated, maybe if you live with a parent or guardian who died or who served time in jail or prison. You live with anyone who is mentally ill or suicidal, especially for the several weeks or months even. Living with anyone who had a drug or alcohol problem or any other types of substance abuse, or experiencing any violent behavior in the household. And once you take a moment and have that number for yourself, we want to kind of talk about the data and what this looks like for our students. And so this survey, as we're going over the data, I also invite you to jot down any thoughts or wonderings or even any emotions that may come up. This data is from Child Trends. So in every region, the data found that the prevalence of ACEs is lowest among Asian non-Hispanic children. And in most regions, guess what? It's highest among who? Black non-Hispanic children. And this causes a lot of stress reactions in children, including how they feel intensive fear or terror and helplessness. And over a period level of time, right, those increased toxic levels of stress hormones can really interrupt their normal physical and mental development. And it can even change our brain's architecture. But the good thing about the brain is that we are able to rewire it, and we can do that through mindfulness practices. And so specifically, if you look at the first graphic within the United States, it's just kind of going over some of those ACEs that we kind of saw on that previous slide. Overall in the United States, about 10% of children have 3 to 8 ACEs. So that's kind of on the high end where that impact could be much profound, whereas 55% have 0 ACEs. And again, right, keeping in mind that majority of those folks that do not have a high level of ACEs are identified as Asian non-Hispanic. And then here, when we look at this data, still in the based in the United States, but kind of breaking it down by demographic, right? That yellow highlight indicates that statistically it's a significant level that's higher than white non-Hispanics. The blue highlight is that it's a percent lower than white non-Hispanics. And then red means it's interpret that with caution, because the confidence level when they did the data was greater than 120%. But if you notice, right, when we look in that black column, which a lot of our students in DCPS, right, is that yellow or that blue highlight, because those rates are significantly higher than white non-Hispanic counterparts. And just to dig a little bit deeper, when we look at it in terms of the regions, overall in the United States, Black students have 2 or more ACEs, that's 33% of them. And then when we look in other places in terms of regions, the rest of them are lower. And then again, feel free to put any thoughts or comments or anything that's kind of popping out at you as we kind of review this data. You guys can put that in the chat or journal it in your own reflection. So specifically when we talk about DCPS, and again, just highlighting this equity work and proactively working to eliminate these opportunity gaps, right, by interrupting that institutional bias and really investing in effective strategies to ensure that every student succeeds. So a lot of the things show that, again, majority of our district are Black students. And we also know that they're coming to us most of the time with high ACEs or more adverse childhood experiences than other students in their same age group. So we know that that might look like disruptive behavior in the classroom or high levels of stress. So knowing that, we have to do what they need, and we can do that through mindfulness. One of the things that DCPS focuses on is making sure that our students not only feel challenged and prepared, but also feels love. And then according to the graphic, right, we can see that that's about 58% of students feeling love. So that shows the importance of making sure that we are connecting with students and meeting them where they are, so that we can not only build them up academically, but also build them up with being proud of who they are. And I also want to share a quote from one of my favorite books that I just read called Just As I Am by Cicely Tyson. And the quote reads, "When you're Black and doing just about anything in this life, you don't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines for long. Work becomes amid the reality that when you slow down, so does your income. The wealth gap between Blacks and whites in the U.S., created by decades of systemic injustice, always have been more pronounced for Black women." And when we think about the education field, majority of our educators, this is a majority woman profession. We have a lot of Black women teachers as well. And it's just that idea of I have to grind, I can't stop moving. And we're really going to work on ways to challenge that. And I see somebody brought up a question or a wondering in the chat, and I wholeheartedly agree, right? It says, so why don't we have more social workers and psychologists on staff in school? Shouldn't we assign based on this set of numbers instead of some ratio that does not allow for equity? Exactly. And I also kind of just want to highlight, right, that looks different. My school is in Ward 8, but maybe a school in Ward 2 or Ward 5, their needs are different depending on their funding, right? So making sure that we are equitable when we are assigning and hiring DCPS, school-based social workers and psychologists. I think that was a really good point to bring up. Thank you for that. Okay. So knowing this, kind of taking a little bit of time to think about some of our own current biases and some of the things that we may have learned. There are a lot of things that we have to unlearn, we got to relearn, and then we got to replace them. And we know that conscious discipline reminds us of our three brain states. We have to feel love, right? We have to feel safe, and then we can be ready to learn. So there's a lot of healing that needs to take place, not only in our schools, but also just in the world in itself, especially as a result of COVID-19 and how that has been affecting Black America. And so another quote I just want to share is that healing as I see it is not the absence of pain. Rather, it is a gradual reduction in the ache. The lessening of that hurt eventually makes room for fond memories to surface. And it's important to highlight that this is not just a one and done. We have to continually be able to do this work so that we can replace some things that we need to replace so that we can make room for more fond memories to surface, right? And allow the next generation and the next generation to be prepared with those schools. And so we can do this by examining student expectations, student discipline, right? Really interrogating our personal identity and biases, really modeling and practicing mindfulness for ourselves so that we can share that with students and other folks, and really fostering that sense of safety and connection. And so now we're going to kind of move into our practice sessions where we're going to engage in some mindfulness practices. And these are things that you can do to take radical rest. These are things that I personally do on my own time in the classroom. My students know that we're going to take a mindful moment. And one of these strategies is something that everybody is going to do because it just has so many benefits for us. And it's okay to take that pause, regardless of whatever the academic deadline may be. We're going to meet those, but it's also important that I take this moment for myself, this radical rest moment, this mindfulness moment, so that we can all make sure that we are operating on our optimum level. And so we're going to engage in a quick body scan and a short meditation movement. I will guide you through the process. And then just as a heads up, right, there's several benefits of having a body scan. As a consistent practice, it helps reduce a lot of anxiety and depression. It helps develop that body awareness. It helps really quiet the mind. And it can also help early detection of disease, just to name a few. So however you are sitting, I invite you to ground down. So if you're sitting with your feet on the floor, make sure you can really feel the ground underneath you. Allow your back to be straight. And we're going to first just kind of start with some body movement. So this first one I like to call sunrise and sunset. And here we're going to connect our movement to our breath. So we're going to inhale and bring the arms up. And then we'll exhale and bring the arms down. And so let's do that 2 more times at the pace of your own breath. Inhale up and then exhaling down. 1 more, inhale up and exhale down. Next, we're going to do a side twist. So we're going to inhale, bring those arms up again. And this time we're going to twist to either the left or the right. I'm going to twist to the left first. So I'm going to twist to the left. My right hand kind of finds my left knee or my left thigh, and I just look to that side. Slight tuck of the chin so that our back and spine are in alignment. And then same thing on the other side. So inhale, arms go up. And exhale, bring your arms to the opposite side. Inhale, arms up again, and then they can just kind of fall back down to wherever they were. Then let's engage in just some slight neck rolls. So bring your ear to your shoulder, and then go back and forth on each side. And if it's comfortable, you can continue to find some movement here, maybe some slow neck rolls, some shoulder rolls. Maybe you might need to roll your wrists or roll your ankles. And as we engage in this short meditation, I want you to find something in front of you to focus on, or if it's comfortable for you, you can close your eyes. And we're going to just take a moment to check in with our body without any judgment, just noticing how we are feeling in this moment. And so starting to bring awareness to the top of the head, your crown, that's helpful for you as we go through each body part. You might can touch it to bring some awareness there, and just noticing anything that you may feel, any sensations, any tingling, and even noticing any thoughts and emotions that are coming up in this space. And then we'll bring awareness to the face. So just noticing your eyes, noticing your nose, your cheeks, even noticing if your tongue is on the top of your mouth or the bottom of your mouth, if it's touching your teeth, if it's not. And slowly just continue to go all the way down until we reach the bottoms of our feet. Bringing awareness to the chest and shoulders and arms and fingers, thighs, knees, legs, and toes. Once you reach the toes, scan all the way back up, taking as much time as you need until you reach the crown of the head again. And then I invite you to say the affirmation, I am aware of my body. And take a nice deep breath, and then we can begin to open our eyes if they were closed and bringing our awareness back to the space. And so again, this body scan is one method that you can use to put into your wellness kit. This is something that you can do in your personal time. It doesn't have to take long, or if you feel you need to sit with yourself a little bit more, the time can also be extended. When we talk about thinking about how we examine our student expectations and how we expect our students to not only learn academically, but also how we expect them to behave. We expect students to sometimes be able to control things that, one, they don't even know they're experiencing, they don't know how to name it. And two, right, they have no tools to navigate a lot of things that they may be dealing with. So an important practice is having a gratitude practice. And the reason why this is important, right, because we can actually rewire our brain if we practice these mental activities. So the happy chemicals or the messengers in our brain that really impact our nervous system, that's our control system, right? So we have dopamine, and that's where we get our extrinsic motivation, rewards, short terms, right? And then we also have serotonin. So that's that intrinsic motivation and long term. And both of these, when they are not, if they are in dysfunction, it can show as a dysfunction of a symptom of stress, and can also induce pain and trauma. So some of the reasons why we may be feeling the way we feel, especially with our health, it's because some of those natural chemicals that we can produce on our own, we've just experienced so much trauma. Thinking about it, right? Students have experienced so much trauma that brain pathway is just not there, so we have to rewire it. So one thing that we can do is a gratitude circle. So I'm going to open it up. If anybody wants to come off mute or share something in the chat, just naming or even writing it down, something that you are grateful for, right? And this lives in our prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex of our brain is that part of our brain that helps us make responsible and logical decisions. So when we're stressed out, right, we're operating from that flight or freeze mode, versus when we're able to live in our prefrontal cortex, we're able to really make logical decisions because our body is getting everything that it needs. And again, that's something that you can journal. I journal gratitude every morning, and that's a practice that you can have as a journal. And that's something also that can be done in the classroom. All right, so another strategy, doing a time check, I want to make sure you guys get the strategies. Another strategy I like to call worry rep, and it's just a way to hold space for whatever it is that may be on your mind, right? One of my favorite quotes is, just because I carry it all so well doesn't mean it's not heavy. And with everything that we are dealing with, from COVID to personal to professional things that we have going on in our lives, it's a lot going on. And sometimes we're just not okay. And we have to name that. And it's okay to not be okay. So we have to find ways to clear up some of that mental space, right? And clear up some of that brain capacity. So one way we can do that is through a worry web. So I invite you now, we're going to engage in this for about 60 seconds. Again, in your own time, this is something you can always come back to. But you just take a paper, and I like to just make a web, and I write the first thing that I'm worried about. So in that first middle circle, I might just write COVID. And then I'll start drawing lines and write about everything else that kind of worries me when it comes to COVID. And just speaking from experience, right? And I'm going to be vulnerable here because I know this is a safe space, is that we're ready to go back into the building. That was not in my experience during this school year, but I know moving forward, I have no idea what that's going to look like. I have no idea what the expectations with students, none of what that's going to look like in this moment. So instead of me staying up at night and being worried about it, I allow myself these times to just kind of engage in a worry rep, but I write it all down and just remembering, right? The things that we think create our feelings create our behaviors, and our behavior reinforces those thoughts. So when we notice some of the things that we're consistently worried about, we can kind of identify some of those behaviors that we may be engaging in, whether they're healthy or unhealthy, and what we need to continue to do and the things that we need to stop doing. So I'm going to give us about 60 seconds here to pause and give us some worry web space time. And so for however long that you use this practice in the future, after it, my favorite thing to do is take that paper or whatever it is that you were writing on and literally rip it up into shreds, because that does two things. One, we put pen to paper, we wrote it out, so we're creating some space in our mental capacity. But then two, that physical act of ripping that paper up releases that from us. Another important thing to do, and this is when it comes time to set intentions, right? And setting intentions are very important. And I like to differentiate between affirmations versus intentions. And affirmation is something that's already true about myself. So, I might say I am strong, right? I am beautiful, I am smart. But when we come down to setting intentions, it's really a commitment with action. So even when we are not feeling our best or feeling our whole selves, we can set that intention to come with an action with it. So I'm going to invite us to practice this intention setting. I'm going to play some music, of course, and I want you to think of something that you can commit to or an intention that you can create for yourself. Maybe it's I choose to begin radically resting, or maybe it's more of I am going to make sure I hit the gym 3 times a week. Whatever it is that you feel like your intention needs to be, what thing are you committing to? And if there's a word in the graphic, if there's a word in a graphic that kind of pops out or stands out to you, I invite you to use one of those as well. And again, we're going to do this for about 60 seconds. Okay, so we want to pause here. So that's a second strategy, right? The importance of setting intentions. This is something you can do first thing when you wake up in the morning. You can think of it as goals that you may want to set, or you can also think of it of how you want to show up. I see somebody in the chat said taking a woosah moment for myself during the day. Yes, that's radical rest right there. In the classroom all the time, at first, students and colleagues will make fun of me and kind of laugh, but they know that in the moment I will say, yep, I'm pausing to take a breath because I'm feeling frustrated and I need to make sure I'm responding in an appropriate manner. And just naming that and modeling it making it authentic to how you really practice that and take care of yourself. And so to put it all together, yes, I said radically rested. Because sometimes I think, we act like we can't take a pause in the middle of a lesson, or when something may happen, right? We have to be okay with taking that pause. It's not normally what we are used to. Sometimes we may ignore things and say, oh, I'm going to get to that after class, or I'll make a mental note and check in with that student later. But sometimes in the moment, it's really important to show up and be able to just radically rest in that moment. And so putting it all together, as we begin to wrap up, we're going to just kind of wrap up with a Kahoot, because another way to radically rest, right, is things that bring us joy. So fun and games are a lot of things that we like to do. So if you haven't played before, we're going to play a Kahoot. We're going to put the link in the chat, and then I'll share my screen and the code will pop up. You do not have to use your real name. You can make an anonymous name. There's going to be about 10 questions about some of the things that we went over today. So just as a wrap up, right, putting it all together, the 3 practices that I want to leave you with, I call the daily gig, right? And that's gratitude. One of my favorite affirmations that I use is, I invite more abundance into my life when I focus on my own abundance. So just starting a day or even at nighttime, listening to the 3 reasons we are grateful to really release that dopamine and serotonin naturally in the brain. And our intentions as well as our goals. So I'm going to share my screen and then I'll give you guys the code to the Kahoots, and then we'll wrap up there. So the code is 620-5718. 620-5718. And I do just want to highlight, because the time is 5:13. I believe in being mindful of time. So once we reach that 5:15 mark, just know that this will also be available in the Canvas course that you will all have access to, I believe, in the next week or two. All right. So what's something that you can commit to for mindfulness practices when you think of your students and your families? So maybe it's pausing, silent time, meditation, and body scans, maybe reflecting and doing a worry web activity, maybe some breath and some movement with stretches or yoga or any other type of physical activity, or reflecting using like gratitude journaling and or circles. All right, it seems like that pausing, right? That radical rest in the moment, that was a top answer. And with this one, there's no right or wrong answers. It just depends on who gets their answer in the fastest. Would you recommend this session? 1, 2, 3, or 4. How do you agree? And if you're new to Kahoot, this is a game, one of the games that my students love. I play it in class all the time, and it's really a good way to review, a good way to pause, right? And then also just a good way to invite some joy and some fun into the classroom. Okay, so most of us are kind of agreeing. That's great. I see Nikki's still in the lead. I will do one more question. This is just another way you can check in with yourself and with your students. What zone are you in? So thinking about our zones of regulation, right? Blue zone, maybe sick, sad, maybe a little tired. Green zone, happy, calm, good energy, ready to go. Yellow, maybe a little worried or excited, maybe some loss of control. Or red, you're in that zone where you need some help. You're out of control. You're really angry and or upset. All right. Okay, so in this session, we didn't have anybody in the red zone today. All right. So I'm going to pause the game here. And again, that's something that we can always go back to. Just want to make sure that I'm being mindful of time. In the chat, there is an exit ticket for you guys to complete. So that has been posted. I'm grateful for all of you who have shown up today. So hopefully there's some information that you guys can begin to complete into your wellness practices when it comes to really just taking that time to radically rest. And again, I'm Deepening Crowe. I'm at Turner Elementary, and my contact info is on the screen. I'm also on Instagram if anybody is interested in following at DC Royal Gems. So I appreciate you guys for this space and this time. And please make sure that you complete the survey. The link has been posted in the chat. And thank you guys for engaging in the chat and engaging in the Jam board. I see the chats coming in. But yes. Thank you, Anise, for being back up and support.
No problem, anytime.
All right, so thank you. I know some of we're completing that survey, so if you have to hop off, that is also perfectly fine. If anybody wanted to stay on and had any questions or comments, that space is open as well. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Wellness Wednesday, as I like to call it. So make sure that you choose to do something for yourself today.